Welcome to Part 6 of The Red Room. Visit brooksaudiobooks.com for an awesome collection of unique, full-length audiobooks. And be sure to subscribe to be notified when new books are released. Chapter 11. Sir Arthur, the master of Chadlands, felt a mixture of attraction and unease towards his guest. Signor Morgan displayed a way of thinking that was entirely foreign to him. While Sir Arthur often found himself in agreement with certain sentiments expressed by the man, there were also many opinions that surprised and even shocked him. He realized that some of the words spoken flew right over his head. The old Italian had a knack for English that rivaled his command of his native tongue. He wielded phrases with the skill of a seasoned performer, using irony and double meanings that were half playful and half biting, showcasing a perspective on humanity that thrived on unexpected turns of phrase, compliments that, upon closer inspection, revealed a different truth. After the visitor had retired for the night, Mary's father voiced his thoughts to Henry. "If it didn't seem so unlikely," he said, "I could almost believe that Signor Morgan was trying to pull a fast one on me at times." "I think he does try, and he often succeeds," young Gainsborough replied. "His mind is as quick as a monkey's, despite his age. He's quite a clever fellow. His thoughts race 1,000 times faster than ours and are 1,000 times more nuanced." "But he's truly captivating," Mary insisted. "Indeed, he is a gentleman," Henry said. "An Italian gentleman. Their sense of propriety differs from ours, that's all. Good manners are largely shaped by geography, just like any other customs. I have faith in him, regardless." "So do I, Mary. I believe he wouldn't go to such extraordinary lengths if he didn't feel at least a bit optimistic." But Sir Arthur remained skeptical. "He's elderly, and sometimes his mind plays tricks on him. No doubt he's incredibly sharp, but his brilliance belongs to another era. He hasn't changed with the times any more than I have. His eyes still flash, and he definitely has claws, but like a beloved old Persian cat, he wouldn't dream of using them." "I think he would," her cousin replied. "He might pounce on someone from behind. At any rate, he's too old to grasp democracy." "He understands it all too well," Sir Arthur said. "Like me, he knows that democracy is just autocracy flipped inside out. Human nature isn't built for such lofty ideals. It suits sheep and oxen, not men. He's an aristocrat, a remnant of the past, proud as a peacock beneath his humility, as kind-hearted as you are, father." "I have my doubts about his kindness," Henry said. "Latins aren't known for being kind, but his cleverness is undeniable. One must be cautious of first impressions, Mary." "No, when they're so pleasant, one shouldn't be. There's nothing small or petty about him. It was lovely of such an old man to go to so much trouble." Henry Gainsborough reminded them of practical matters. "The first order of business is to get the room ready for him. He's set to see Uncle Arthur at 11 o'clock, and will want to visit the grey room afterward. If we get Chubb and a few men from the village first thing in the morning, they can help Caunter prepare the room before lunch." Sir Arthur rang the bell and instructed that workers be sent for as early as possible the next day. "I'm a bit concerned about what the authorities will say, though," he told Henry once his orders were given. "What can they say other than they'll be pleased if this devilish situation is resolved? It seems almost too good to be true." "That's what I think too, but I share Mary's optimism. I honestly think Signor Morgan knows a lot more about the grey room than he lets on." "How is that even possible?" his uncle asked. "Time will tell, but I'm going to support him." The next morning at 11 o'clock, the visitor arrived. He walked with a gold-headed cane made of ebony and dressed in a style that seemed out of another time. He was sharp and focused, with no trouble concentrating on his subject. It seemed he had all the details at his fingertips, and he delved into the history of the grey room as far back as Sir Arthur could follow. "We know of 5 victims for certain," he said, "because it's hard to doubt they all met the same fate under similar circumstances." "4 victims, Signor." You're forgetting your elderly relative, the lady who spent Christmas with your father when you were a boy and was found dead on the floor. Colonel Vane remembered her because you mentioned her when recounting the tale of Nurse Forrester. I never linked my elderly aunt to the tragedies that followed. No one did. Still, it wasn't merely old age and a hearty meal that took her life. She too fell victim to an assassin. You continue to speak of crime. If I'm not mistaken, crime is the only appropriate word here. But forgive me, is it conceivable that the same criminal could kill 3 men last year and an old woman over 60 years ago? Quite possible, don't you see? I hope to have the chance to show you shortly. It seems, then, that this malevolent force is indeed as enduring as poor May believed, a conscious entity lurking there, just beyond our sight and understanding. No, no, my friend. Let me be straightforward. I hold no theory that entertains either good or evil spirits. Trust me, there are far fewer things in heaven and earth than we imagine. Humanity has filled its mind with an endless amount of nonsense of its own making. Much of his beliefs and practices are grounded in myths and dreams. He is incredibly gullible and stubbornly adheres to tradition. However, I urge you to question tradition at every turn, and the older it is, the more skepticism you should have. We still carry too much of the primitive within us, holding on to far more of its mental clutter and nonsense than we realize. Intellect should clarify rather than complicate, and those who come after us will look back with pity at this generation, much like flies trapped in webs spun by their rough forebears. Yet the fundamental truths are few. A child could count them. However, we are far too fond of accepting what our ancestors accepted. Sadly, I am the worst offender in this regard. So let us, once and for all, discard the supernatural, as far as the grey room is concerned. No ghost lingers there. No demon or spirit hides within to torment good men and women. It's odd that you echo nearly the same thoughts that poor Peter Flanders had. I truly hope you are correct. So far, I am indeed right. We can exclude the afterlife from our considerations. He asked a variety of questions, many of which didn't seem relevant to the topic, yet he offered no suggestions or theories just yet. He suspected that Peter Flanders might have reached a conclusion if death hadn't interrupted his investigation. Occasionally, he raised his hand gently for silence, allowing a response to penetrate his thoughts. I find that I think very slowly about new ideas now, he said. An idea has to settle in gradually and find its place. That's the challenge with new ideas. There's so little room for them when you're 80. The established opinions take up all the space and are jealous of newcomers. Sir Arthur then informed him that the room was being prepared and would be ready after lunch. He voiced his concerns for the workers. Make sure they're careful, he said. If I'm correct, the danger remains. They should work quickly and not linger about. No harm has ever occurred when only one person is in the room alone. The detectives didn't see or sense anything. Still, the assassin was more than capable of dealing with the detectives. Believe me, Sir Arthur. It was a lovely day, and Signor Morgan expressed a desire to enjoy the fresh air. They soon strolled along the terrace, where Mary joined them. He requested her arm, which she willingly offered, while Prince trotted contentedly beside her, catching the visitor's attention. Just like me, your dog is on the verge of something better, he remarked. He will do great deeds in the happy hunting grounds, I assure you. They shared stories about Prince's exploits, and he listened intently. Still, that loyal creature should pass now. He is blind, and paralysis is crippling his hind legs. Sir Arthur gently patted the head of his old companion. He will pass on Friday, he replied. The vet will come then. I must admit, the thought causes me real sorrow. He has certainly earned the gift of mercy. What is that magnificent tree with large white blossoms? I've seen something similar before, but know regrettably little about plants. A tulip tree, Mary answered. It's said to be the finest in Devonshire. It's a stunning sight, but everything here is beautiful, An English spring can be truly enchanting. I'll ask you to take me to see the primroses soon. Those are azaleas over there, a breathtaking blaze of color. He praised the scenery, reminiscing about the formal gardens of Italy. Then, after lunch and a few cigarettes, Signor Morgan stood, bowed to Sir Arthur, and said, "Now, if you please." They followed him silently as his eyes explored the grey room. The space remained unchanged, and the playful cherubs on the grand chairs seemed to greet the daylight after their long slumber. The visitor moved leisurely from one end of the room to the other, nodding to himself and becoming increasingly animated. He gathered his excitement, then spoke up. "I believe I will help you, Sir Arthur," he said. "That's wonderful news, my friend." The old man then became distracted, turning his attention away from them and towards the room's contents. If he had uncovered a clue, he seemed in no hurry to pursue it. Instead, he launched into a discussion about the furniture, and they listened patiently, since it was clear that interruptions unsettled him. But it felt as though he took pleasure in testing their patience. "Such beautiful pieces," he remarked, "but they are not Spanish, as you suggested. The wood is Spanish chestnut, yet everything else is Italian. It is only fitting that such exquisite Italian craftsmanship would grace a room with an Italian ceiling. Strangely, my bedroom in Rome closely resembles this one. I live in a villa from the 15th century that once belonged to the Colonna family. My chests are even finer than these, but I must admit that your bed and chairs surpass mine. There is a reason for that. Let's examine them for Mrs. May's sake. Are these carved chairs, adorned with reliefs of dancing cherubs, familiar to her? I mean, the figures." Mary shook her head. "Then it's clear that you did not visit Prato during your travels in Italy. These groups of children dancing and playing horns are cleverly copied from Donatello's famous pulpit in the cathedral. The design continues from the chairs to the footboard of the bed, and in the center of the footboard is an oval painting, framed like an easel picture. It has faded over the centuries, and the garlands have wilted as one would expect, but I can still sense the muted colors well enough, and I know who the artist is." "Can it be, Signor, this faint shadow of a painting?" "Absolutely, there's no doubt. You see a little pinturicchio there. Notice the vibrant bands of intricate patterns, the arabesques, and the fruits. Their colors may have faded, but their shapes and certain quirks of the master are unmistakable. These delicate embellishments were the trademark of artists from the 15th century like Ghazali and Pinturicchio. It was these men tasked with painting and decorating the Vatican for the very figure we will discuss shortly. It fell to Michelangelo to render their creations mere flashes of color and trivialities when set against the vastness and intellectual brilliance of his later masterpieces in the Sistine Chapel. But that's a story for later. Right now, we need to focus on the Pope for whom these chairs and this bed were crafted. Yes, a Pope, my friends, none other than Alexander VI. He paused, like a seasoned performer, anticipating the huge reaction he expected and deserved. But it never came. Unfortunately for Signor Morgan's big moment, his words seemed to leave everyone largely unmoved. Sir Arthur inquired politely, "Was he a good pope or a bad one? I'm afraid many of those gentlemen didn't have much to recommend them." The signor felt the disappointment of his grand reveal. At first he regretted the lack of response, and a fleeting wave of irritation, even disdain, washed over him. But soon he felt pleased that the secret would be kept hidden for another 24 hours, which would only heighten its dramatic impact through the delay. He was already plotting for the future, envisioning splendid theatrics. While he couldn't be entirely sure he was right, the old man felt a growing conviction. He ignored Sir Arthur's question, instead posing one of his own. "The detectives searched this room with great care, you say?" "They certainly did." "And yet, what can careful observation and dedication do? What can the most diligent student accomplish when faced with ignorance? It astonishes me that no one had the crucial information to at least guide them in the right direction. But I digress. After all, we are focused solely on the grey room, are we not? The grey room has a notorious reputation, does it not?" Indeed, it does. And yet, with just a bit of knowledge about a few peculiar facts and a touch of history, once again, who shall be held accountable? Who can be expected to hold that bit of history that matters so much in this room? How could history have aided us, Signor? Henry Gainsborough asked. I shall explain. History is always useful. It's woven into everything around us, not just here, but throughout this grand house. Take these chairs, for instance. Because of my background, I can read an entire chapter of the Renaissance in them. To you, they're simply old furniture. You presumed they were Spanish since they were purchased in Valencia, but you didn't know, Sir Arthur, that your grandfather acquired them there, much to the dismay of another collector. Yes, these chairs have stories to tell, just as the ceiling above holds its own tales. It, too, is a copy. History truly breathes life into this home. If I knew more history, then other beautiful items would speak to me as clearly as these chairs do, as clearly as the trophies of the hunt and the tiger skins below likely speak to Sir Arthur. But aren't we all part of history? Men, women, even children. To live is to take your place in history, even if, as in my case, that history may go unrecorded save in the chronicles of the eternal. Yes, I am history now, and I hail from a time before Italy was united. Much rich information will be lost forever when I pass. Believe me, while the younger generation shouts out new knowledge and revels in their brilliance, we of the old guard are fading into the earth, taking the old knowledge with us. Yet, they merely rediscover for themselves what we once knew. Human life resembles a snake eating its own tail. Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence and the insights of our ancestors resonate in the words of our children as if they are revolutionary discoveries. Henry Gainsborough tried to steer the conversation back on track. What knowledge, what specific area of expertise does one need, Signor, to uncover what you have revealed? Just a mere trinket of knowledge, my young friend, a minor branch of forgotten learning, I fear not well tended by your Scotland Yard. Nonetheless, I have encountered country gentlemen who excel in it, the practice of heraldry. I noticed your coat of arms on those Italian gates. I would like to see those gates again. I worry they might not be up to par. But the arms, a chevron between 3 lions, what a splendid design, even if it's likely not as old as the gates themselves. That reminds me of something that puzzled me in Florence, Sir Arthur said. I had encountered it before somewhere, but I can't quite place it. A golden bull's head on a red background. Signor Morgan perked up and laughed. Ha ha, we'll come back to the golden bull soon enough, Sir Arthur. I assure you, you'll encounter him. He paused, patting his forehead. But I'm getting ahead of myself, far too ahead indeed. I must give my poor brain a moment to rest, or it will rattle in my head like a dried walnut. When that begins, I know I've pushed myself enough for the moment. May I stroll in the garden again, but not alone. Would you join me? Of course, unless you prefer to retire for a while and rest, came the response. I will do so shortly, but please ensure that no one enters the grey room but me. No soul should come or go without my presence. Sir Arthur inquired, So, you still believe the danger is tangible then? An active physical entity directed by a conscious human mind? If I am correct, it is most definitely active, Signor Morgan replied. They stepped into the garden, where Signor Morgan found a comfortable spot in the sun, and settled there. Henry and his uncle exchanged glances, and his uncle's confidence began to wane as the Italian's thoughts seemed to drift further away. He grew increasingly irrelevant, repeating himself about the old dog resting at his master's feet. Euthanasia for the elderly. Why not? In fact, I've thought about it for myself during darker times. Have you ever noticed how we choose to end our pets, suffering out of love for them, yet we let our fellow humans endure nature's cruelest forms of decline? It's one of those dreadful dilemmas where mercy and faith can't seem to come to an agreement. They offered polite responses, but the old man shifted topics again, venturing onto new territory. There was a prince, not a dog, but a royal lad from the east, Prince Jem, the brother of Sultan Bajazet. Are you familiar with that tale? Perhaps not. It's fairly inconsequential. To this day, the outcome remains as mysterious as the grey room. Historians today tend to sanitize the actions of Alexander VI regarding Prince Jem. It's a common tendency for historians to gloss over the faults of figures from the past. It's a noble aspect of human nature, really, to seek out the good even while ignoring the bad. As a poet wisely noted, distance makes the heart grow fonder, or at least softer. We often lean toward the uplifting when discussing those from history who have passed. Figures like Nero, Caligula, Calvin, Alva, Napoleon, Torquemada, all these monstrous, bloody characters seem to fade into something more benign as time goes on. Soon enough, they'll be depicted with wings and halos. But not me. I am unapologetically a hater, my friends. Yet here I am rambling. You should hold me to task, keep me on track. Sultan Bajazet wanted his younger brother removed from the picture, and he paid the papacy 40,000 ducats a year to keep the young man imprisoned in Italy. It was a gilded prison, and no doubt the indulgent Eastern prince was enjoying himself in Rome just as much as he would have in Constantinople. However, after Alexander took the papal triple crown, Bajazet stopped sending the promised 40,000 ducats. The Pope then wrote a stern letter to the Sultan, warning him that the King of France intended to capture Prince Jem and go to war against the Turks over it. Does this bore you? Not at all, Mary replied. Alexander then insisted that in order to fend off the French threat and protect Bajazet's lands from invasion, he needed the 40,000 ducats immediately. The Sultan, likely alarmed by such a menace, sent the money along with a private letter. He was as skilled a diplomat as the Pope, and had devised a way to avoid this hefty annual tribute by making arrangements upon Jem's death. Unfortunately for him, both the papal envoy and Bajazet's messenger were intercepted on their way back by the brother of Cardinal della Rova, Alexander's fiercest rival. As a result, the secrets of that letter were revealed, and the Christian world was horrified to learn that Bajazet had offered the Pope 300,000 ducats to have Prince Jem assassinated. Time went on, and the Pope emerged victorious over his enemies. He planned to hand over the young Turk to Charles of France, effectively putting a temporary check on the powerful rover. But then, as we know, Prince Jem suddenly died, and while some recent accounts claim he made it to France only to perish there, destroyed by his own excesses, I, for one, do not buy that story. He never set foot in France, my friends. Rest assured, Alexander VI was not the kind of man to let any life stand in the way of his treasury and 300,000 ducats. Signor Morgan fell silent for a moment, then he unexpectedly returned to the topic that had brought him to Chadlands. He had been thinking it over, and now began to voice his reflections. You'll need to hold your impatience just a little while longer, until another night has passed. If you'll allow me, I plan to spend some time in the grey room after dark to uncover what the spirits of old have to share. Do you think I might encounter the ghost of Prince Jem, or perhaps see Pinturicchio's spirit lingering near his painting? Maybe even those clever artisans from the past who crafted the ceiling. At least they would speak the Tuscan tongue, and I'd feel at ease among them. Sir Arthur protested. That is the last thing I could allow, sir, he replied. Yet it is the very first thing that must happen, the older man said calmly. You need not worry about me, Sir Arthur. I joke about the spirits, but really there are no spirits in the grey room. If there are, they wouldn't have any reason to quarrel with you or with me. What truly lurks in the heart of your house is something far worse than any spirit, something powerful, restless, and sinister. Instead of being surprised by all that has happened, I am amazed that things are not worse. But I possess the magic talisman, the open sesame. I'll be safe, even if I am mistaken. Though my fires may be dying down, it will take more than your grey room to snuff them out. I hold the key to the maze, and I will navigate it safely. Tomorrow, I'll let you know if my intuition is correct. I must admit, I find any such plan to be very unsettling. I have been specifically instructed by the authorities to prevent anyone from conducting further experiments alone. Virgilio Morgan displayed a hint of irritation. I beg your pardon, but your mind seems to be lacking its usual sharpness, my friend. Have I not shared everything with you? What does Scotland Yard matter if they remain completely clueless while I am illuminated? Let them know they are as blind as bats and owls, while one old man has outsmarted them all. You have indeed told us a great deal, my dear sir, and much of what you have shared is deeply fascinating. In your mind, you may think these various facts are connected, leading you to some conclusion about the grey room. However, that is not the case for us. These statements leave us just as we were before. They hang in the air, disconnected, even from one another. I will be straightforward, as this matter requires it. It's only natural that you wouldn't feel as we do, but I must remind you that what to you is merely an extraordinary mystery is far more significant to us. You possess a vivid imagination, much greater than mine, and can likely sense the terrible suffering that the past has inflicted on my daughter and me. Our slow English minds can't process thoughts as quickly as yours, Signor, Mary remarked. We may seem foolish, but— I concede, he replied immediately, rising from his chair and bowing, hand over his heart. I am but a frail old fool, not quick-witted at all. Please forgive me. Here is the situation. Since you didn't guess due to your understandable ignorance of a certain fact, I will hold off on revealing my discovery a little longer for the sake of absolute proof. There is drama occurring here, and we must be skilled dramatists. We cannot spoil or rush the climax. Tomorrow, or perhaps even tonight, you won't have to wait long in suspense. I refuse to go alone and defy Scotland Yard. This aged companion of mine, this spaniel, shall accompany me. Good Prince and I will retire early, and if you wish, we would be pleased to have you join us in the grey room, perhaps 6 or 7 hours from now. I do not sleep there. I merely keep a watchful vigil, as all the others did, but it will be shorter than theirs. Will you oblige me? Mary spoke up, noticing the pain etched on her father's face. She was certain the old man knew exactly what he was talking about. She leaned over to Henry and shared her thoughts, to which he nodded in agreement. Morgan had unravelled the mystery. He had even helped them solve it. But now, perhaps to teach them a lesson for their earlier foolishness, he was intentionally withholding the key, partly out of a desire for dramatic effect, partly out of playful mischief. He was concocting something theatrical. He envisioned himself at the centre of this tragic tale, and it was only natural that he wanted to take his place effectively after putting in so much effort. So, while Sir Arthur remained opposed, he was taken aback when Mary began to plead on the visitor's behalf, and his nephew backed her up. Signor Morgan is absolutely correct, father. I'm certain of it, she said. He is right, and because he is right, he is safe. Well said, exclaimed the Italian. There you have it all summed up, my friends. Trust the intuition of a clever woman. I am indeed right. Never has the certainty of my correctness been more vivid, even as I usually find myself doubting my own conclusions. I am right precisely because I cannot be wrong. Trust me. My own safety is completely assured, as we are dealing with the actions of men like ourselves. At least, I hope they are very different from us, but still men nonetheless. It was your misfortune to bring this horror back to light, but it shall be my honor to banish it from the earth. With a single breath, the cleverness of the wicked will be rendered powerless, and it will be just in time. However, the wheels of fate turn slowly. Our success will undoubtedly echo throughout the civilized world. I'm as certain as Signor Morgan himself that he is safe, uncle, said Henry Gainsborough. Let us go have tea, replied Sir Arthur. These matters are far too complex for a simple man like me. I only ask you to consider what this all means for me as the master of Chadlands and someone responsible to the authorities. Think about the trouble that would come if misfortune befell you. It's impossible for that to happen. Many thought so once, and where are they now? More trouble would drive me to madness, Signor. You have endured enough to make you speak so firmly, as has your brave daughter too. But don't worry about anything. I care far too much about you to add any bitterness to what's already happened, my dear Sir Arthur. I feel just as safe in that room as I would at the altar steps of St. Peter's. Trust old Prince, if you can't trust me. I'm counting on your loyal dog to help me. He still has important work to do, that faithful fellow. The detectives brought animals into the room, but they were unharmed, said Gainsborough. And neither will the dog be harmed. He gently stroked the sleeping spaniel, and they got up to head into the house together. Morgan clearly expected that his wishes would be respected. "I'm going to take a nap for a while," he said. "Please excuse me until early dinner, and let Mrs. May and Mr. Gainsborough convince you, as they are convinced themselves. These events have really energized me. I had no idea that at the end of my days, something so extraordinary awaited me. I need to save my energy for tonight. I feel very well, buoyed by the anticipation of coming success. This achievement alone would have made my long journey worthwhile, even without the pleasure of knowing you. So I'll sleep until dinner and come back ready to take part in this wonderful, if melancholic, drama. Let's plan to dine at 7, if that suits you." His excitement battled against the heavy reality of the situation. He reminded one of a mourner at a funeral who feels strange joy rather than grief, but knows he must still act appropriately. They called for his servant, and with Stefano's help, the old gentleman stepped away. He paused for a moment, however, to speak once more. "You will do exactly as I ask, and not let anyone enter the grey room. Keep the key with you, Sir Arthur, and don't go in there yourself either. That room is still a death trap for everyone else in the world except for me." Chapter 12. When Caldwell came to clear away the tea, he found Sir Arthur still not convinced. "What do you think of Signor Morgan, Caldwell?" Henry asked, and the butler, who read the newspapers extensively, replied, "I think he's quite the odd character, Mr. Henry. I've heard that older folks can have a bit of monkey sprinkled into them these days to keep them going and feeling young again. Well, that gentleman seems to have had a whole monkey slipped in somewhere. I've never seen anyone like him. He has a tongue sharper than a rat trap, and he always leaves you guessing. He's incredibly clever. So is his assistant. That Stefano knows a thing or two. He's got Jane Bond wrapped around his finger in a way that's downright scandalous. I never could figure out what she saw in him given her age." "Do you think he'd be safe in the grey room?" Sir Arthur asked. "He'd be safe anywhere. What concerns me is whether our silver is safe, along with a few other things. I caught him snooping around the silver cabinet just this morning. He knows what's valuable. He knows everything. I wouldn't be surprised if he's part of some high-class gang disguised as an old man. I'd bet he hasn't seen as many as 80 years, no matter what he claims." Henry chuckled. "Don't be afraid of him, Caldwell. He's harmless. Let him go into the grey room if you want, Mr. Henry. He knows he's safe anywhere. Yes, Sir Arthur, he's certain he's safe enough. He's got the measure of the place." "Prince will go with him, Caldwell," Lady Patricia added. "Prince? Why is that, ma'am?" "We don't know. He requested it. He can't hurt poor old Prince anyway." "Well, it won't keep me up at night. I hope it doesn't trouble any of you either, if you'll excuse me. Whatever happens, there's nothing in the grey room that will catch that man by surprise. Not that I'm against the gentleman in general, mind you. I just wouldn't trust him an inch. He's just pretending, and he's no more a foreigner than I am. Otherwise, he couldn't speak such fine English as I do, if not better." "Caldwell is with us, father," Mary said, "and he's right. The signor is merely putting on a show. He loves being the centre of attention. All older folks do, and one of the saddest things in life is that they're seldom allowed to be. So he's maximizing his chance. And if you refuse, Uncle Arthur, he'll just leave and claim he can't help you, saying we've caused him all this hassle for nothing," Henry Gainsborough added. They finally got their way, and when Signor Morgan joined them for an early dinner in high spirits, Sir Arthur yielded to his request. "Excellent, my friend, and worry not. A night of anxiety shall not be yours. Indeed, if I'm not mistaken, we all might sleep quite soundly, even if we head to bed a little late. But we should be prepared to stay up until after 2 o'clock. I'll begin my watch at 8 in half an hour. The door will be left open, as you wish. However, I must insist that no one approaches the eastern end of the corridor. That seems only fair. I will allow Mr. Gainsborough to take his place at the top of the grand staircase, and occasionally he may call out to me. He can ask, 'Is all well?' And I assure you I will respond, 'All is well.' Could anything be more agreeable?" Signor Morgan ate lightly, then put on a large fur motor coat and announced he was ready. They thought he had forgotten about Prince, but he insisted on having the old spaniel with him. The dog had eaten and could rest just as well in one spot as another. "Do not worry," the Italian said. "I will be considerate of your elderly pet. I do not ask for his company without reason. He is on my side and will assist me if he can, despite his frailty. I have won him over. Place him at my feet. I'll sit here under the electric light and read my Italian papers." Once again, a solitary figure occupied the grey room, putting his intellect to the test against the dark forces contained within. Signor Morgan bid them farewell cheerfully at 8 o'clock, and while Sir Arthur and Mary headed down to the library, Henry took his place at the top of the staircase. The corridor was well lit, and the door to the grey room was left ajar. But in 10 minutes, the watcher peeked out and called to Gainsborough, who was smoking about 35 yards away. "There's quite a draught here," he said. "I'll close the door, but I'll leave it open just a crack so we can check on each other from time to time." The hours dragged on, and since everyone at Chadlands was aware of what was unfolding, few chose to go to bed. It was understood that sometime after midnight, Signor Morgan intended to announce the outcome of his experiment. Henry Gainsborough checked in every half an hour, always receiving a lively response. But shortly after 1:30, his "All well, Signor," was met with silence. He raised his voice, but still there was no reply. Concerned, he went to the door and peeked into the grey room. The watcher had slumped into the armchair they had positioned under the electric light, lying motionless, yet comfortably. He still wore his fur coat. Prince Henry did not notice. The room was silent and cold. The electric light shone brightly, and both windows were open. Young Gainsborough hurried downstairs, his mind focused on his uncle, wanting to prevent any unnecessary shock. For a moment, he feared that Signor Morgan had met the same fate as others before him in the grey room, but he couldn't be sure. Only half an hour had gone by since the watcher had cheerfully replied to their last call and assured them his vigil was nearly over. Therefore, Gainsborough sought out Caldwell, informing him that the worst might be possible, but also mentioning that the old man keeping watch in the grey room might not be dead. He could simply be asleep. Caldwell felt hopeful that it might indeed be so. "Make sure he's all right. I'll grab the brandy," he said, and with that he took the remedy and followed Henry upstairs. Signor Morgan remained still, but as they got closer, to their immense relief, he stirred, opened his eyes, looked around in confusion, and then grasped the reality of the situation. "Oh dear, I've frightened you both," he remarked, noticing their worried expressions. "Everything is fine. In less than an hour I would have summoned Sir Arthur, but just that last half-hour wore me out and I dozed off. What time is it?" "1:45, Signor." "Excellent, then call for your uncle. I have uncovered the secret." "Perhaps a sip of the aged cognac, Signor," Caldwell suggested. "Certainly, my friend, certainly. I see how wise you both were. I appreciate it. You thought I had slipped away like the others, yet you attempted to revive me without alarming Sir Arthur. Falling asleep was inexcusable." Abraham Caldwell and Henry returned downstairs with the good news, leaving the elderly man to drink. "I'll need you for another half-hour or so," he said, when they all convened again. "But I have no doubt that no one will want to snooze now." Sir Arthur spoke up. "Thank heavens, Signor, thank heavens. You are well." "I'm in perfect health, but I've had a refreshing sleep. I fear you haven't shut your eyes at all." "Would you mind if Caldwell hears what you have to say? This way, we can ensure an accurate report makes its way to Chadlands." "My findings will reach the entire world, Sir Arthur. Everything has been accomplished and established on solid evidence. Your loyal spaniel played his role as well. I salute him, the old prince." Henry then noticed the dog sprawled on the floor at Signor Morgan's feet. "Still sleeping." Mary knelt to stroke the spaniel, but recoiled. "He's so cold." A martyr to science, forever in sleep. Remember, he was supposed to pass on Friday. He left this world a bit sooner, and nothing in his life has marked him quite like his departure. The last victim of the grey room. Do not mourn him. He slipped away without a struggle, much like those before him. "But you spoke of crimes and criminals," Sir Arthur gasped. Indeed, terrible deeds have taken place in this room, committed by notorious criminals. Is a crime any less heinous simply because those responsible have long since decayed in their dishonored graves? Your way of speaking is not ours, and your words carry a different meaning. You say the old dog did not suffer. How did he end up dying in his sleep? Precisely. Without a sound, he became the final esteemed victim of this dreadful shadow. You witnessed his death, yet were unharmed yourself, sir, Gainsborough inquired. That is exactly what occurred. Now, everyone, please take a seat, including you, Father Abraham. In 5 minutes, everything will be as clear as daylight. They complied in silence. Yes, a master criminal, one whose name has resonated through the ages and will gain further infamy starting tomorrow. If only we could hold him accountable. But he has already faced that reckoning if justice is at the heart of all things, as every man hopes, and as you and I believe, Sir Arthur. Here's a thought. How many suffer, if they do not actually perish, from the transgressions of the dead? Not only do the sins of our fathers affect us, but if we dug deeper, we would find the crimes of countless men who lived long before we entered this troubled world. I speak in metaphor, yet this is quite literal. These murders were committed by the deceased, who left behind this burden of sorrow. Signor Morgan gently stroked the lifeless spaniel. When we were alone, I lifted him and laid him on the bed. He did not stir, and I understood he would never awaken again. Now, let us examine this grand bed, shall we? Here is the link, you see, without which so much of what I told you yesterday would have seemed like the ramblings of an old man. Come and take a look. Ah, if only people had been more observant sooner. They followed his gaze, and he pointed to a beautifully carved wooden frame that joined the 4 posts. What do you see in the frieze, above the capitals of those little Ionic pillars? The papal crown and keys, Mary replied. Excellent. Now, look at the other side. A coat of arms, a golden bull on a red background. Oh, Father, that was what puzzled you in Florence. Indeed it was. It lingered in my mind, but I couldn't recall where I had seen it. Signor Morgan poised himself for dramatic effect, and then delivered his revelation. The arms of the Borgia, the arms of the Spanish Pope, Alexander VI, of notorious fame. So it all falls into place, and we will soon retire for the night. Having noted them this morning, you will see how easily I was guided to the heart of this mystery. It just required a certain sign. Everything that has happened aligns perfectly with this revelation. The first to suffer baffled me, but I unraveled that puzzle too. You shall hear how each woman and each man met their end. Look at this mattress, upholstered in satin. There lies the unyielding thing that brings sleep so quickly to others. I surmised it this morning and confirmed it tonight. At 17 minutes past 8, the prince was dead, but not until I awoke around 2 o'clock did I dare approach him. For how did he die? As soon as the heat from his ancient body seeped into the mattress beneath him, it unleashed its deadly poison. He stretched out, curled up again, and as the exhalation rose, with barely a tremor, he slipped from sleep into death. Need I tell you how I kept my distance? I suspected that not until the unfortunate man was cold would the demon in the mattress fade away, just like an efreet retreating into his bottle. The mattress and the dog were equally harmless, just as they are now. I allowed him only 5 hours, as he was a small, fragile creature, and the warmth quickly faded from his body. But, sir, please allow me to address all your concerns if you will hear me out a while longer, dear Mrs. May. Let us settle once more, and you may question me after I have finished, should there be any lingering doubts. Another liqueur, Caldwell. He took a sip and lapsed into silence for a moment, while the others remained quiet. Then, from his armchair, he recounted the tale of the grey room, displaying a remarkable familiarity with even the tiniest details. Indeed, when he finally concluded, no one was left with questions to ask. There are 2 very intriguing facts to consider, my friends, the gentleman began, his smile broad as he relished his own explanation. The first is that a room already burdened with dark associations, believed to be haunted, was precisely the place where this dreadful instrument of destruction was brought. Yet how could it be otherwise? You possess the furniture, and for the time being are unsure what to do with it. Your house is already filled with lovely things, so you store these extra treasures here, safe and out of the way, in a room that isn't being properly utilized. You are neither collectors nor connoisseurs. Sir Arthur's father did not share his enthusiasm, and neither did Sir Arthur himself care for antique furniture. So these pieces find their way into this room, and are, for the most part, forgotten. That is the first intriguing fact, and the second, I believe, is this. Those who met their end here in recent memory all passed away in different parts of the room, in such a manner that their deaths could not be directly traced back to the bed itself. Flanders, as you recounted his conversation, did not link the death of poor Captain May to the lady at the hospital from 11 years ago. Sir Arthur, too, found no connection between the earlier passing of his elderly aunt, which occurred during his childhood, and the tragedy that followed. Let us now consider the remarkable fact that none of the signs of death were found in those who lost their lives here. Death can claim us in three ways: through asphyxia, coma, or syncope. In asphyxia, the pale horseman assaults the lungs, in coma he targets the brain, and in syncope he strikes the heart. When a person dies from asphyxia, it means that the muscles responsible for breathing have failed, or that the lungs have been injured and cannot function, or that the flow of air has been obstructed, as in drowning or strangulation. It could also result from an embolism, where the pulmonary artery becomes blocked and prevents blood from reaching the lungs. But that was not how anyone died in this room. Coma comes about from a stroke or concussion, from certain narcotic or mineral poisons, and in various other ways, all of which do not apply here. That leaves us with syncope. A heart may stop beating due to blood loss, lack of nourishment, exhaustion, or the effects of certain drugs. The individuals who perished here succumbed to syncope, but why? No autopsy can provide the answers. They departed this world with only their creator to support them, and none left behind an explanation for what happened to him or her. Yet we know, even in Peter Flanders' case, which raised suspicion with the police, that he was already dead before Mr. Gainsborough found him and took him away. We know that rigor mortis had begun to set in before his body was brought to London. Still, nothing is truly new under the sun. Many newspapers reported that these individuals had died without cause, as if it were an unprecedented event. But it is not. In 1893, Dr. Templeman detailed 2 cases of sudden death where there were no discernible pathological conditions in the bodies to explain the causes. He recounted the case of a 43-year-old man, referring to it as emotional inhibition of the heart. Unusually, the man's heart had stopped during diastole rather than systole. He had died from syncope, yet the exact cause remained a mystery. A layperson might reasonably describe emotional inhibition of the heart as shock. However, we know that in our cases, if it was indeed a shock, it was not a painful one, perhaps not even an unpleasant one. Since all other emotions can be either pleasant or unpleasant, why should we assume that the ultimate emotion of death cannot also be gentle, if only we knew how to achieve that? Perhaps the Borgias, with all their secrets, had uncovered this. At least the typical signs of death were entirely absent from the faces of the deceased. Their jaws were relaxed, their familiar expressions remained unchanged, lacking the rigidity that usually affects the muscles of the face. Their skin was not pale, their temples did not appear sunken, their brows were not furrowed. Now, let us examine the victims one by one to uncover how each of them died without leaving a trace. Honestly, the first case was the only one that truly challenged me. For a while, I struggled to demonstrate how the bed had been responsible for the demise of Sir Arthur's ancestor, since she had never even laid down in it. Yet, this challenge becomes clear with our current understanding. Once we establish the properties of the bed, everything else follows. You might argue that those properties were merely surmised and not substantiated. That was indeed the case, until Prince's death validated my theoretical framework and turned it into fact. The question of why the bed possesses these properties is something science will need to unravel in due time. Returning to the elderly lady, the matriarch of your lineage, who arrived unexpectedly at the Christmas gathering and chose to rest in the grey room at her own request. She was found dead on the floor the next morning. She hadn't even got into bed. The exact details have faded from memory, and we can only piece them together through inference and the straightforward events that followed. I believe that, although the old lady didn't stir the warmth that unleashed the malevolent spirit of the bed and led to her demise, that warmth was deliberately created nonetheless. What do you suppose happened? The bed was hastily made, and the fire was lit, but the fire was far from the bed and wouldn't have generated the necessary heat. However, there was a hot water bottle in the bed, or perhaps a heated brick wrapped in flannel. The old lady was about to climb into bed. She had extinguished her candle, but the fire still cast its glow. She prayed, removed her dressing gown, and pulled back the covers, becoming an instant victim to the noxious air. She fell backward and was found lifeless the next morning, by which time both the bottle and the bed had grown cold. I understand this explanation might not earn your trust, but consider the weight of the evidence. The old lady could have passed away from natural causes. Perhaps she didn't even turn down the bed. No one remains to tell us. All Sir Arthur recalls is that she was found dead on the floor of the room. He doesn't remember the exact spot, but personally, I have no doubt that her death unfolded just as I described. We're on firmer ground with the other tragic events. However, except for Nurse Forrester, there's nothing evident that connects their deaths to the cursed bed. Yet it's quite easy to make the connection. In the case of the lady, it's all straightforward. She went to bed weary and peacefully slipped into death without waking up. She likely falls asleep within 10 minutes, her warmth not yet reaching the mattress beneath her blankets, as if it could somehow undo her. If she were to die in half an hour, having gone to bed at 10 o'clock and being called at 7, the room would soon burst open to reveal not only her lifeless form, but also the coldness that has settled in. The demon that claimed her has slipped back into slumber beneath its heavy burden. Had she been robust and well covered, there might have been scarcely enough time for her to grow cold, and those who rushed to her side might have suffered the same fate. But she is a slight, frail creature, and her warmth has slipped away. This ensured that those who came to her aid remained safe. There are no hard and fast rules about how long it takes for a dead body to chill to the temperature of its surroundings. Generally, the bodies of the very young and the very old cool more rapidly than those of adults. Under ideal conditions, a body might take 6 to 8 hours to cool fully. Poor little Prince took just 5. Captain May's situation is entirely different. Allow me to speak gently, so as not to cause you further distress. I assure you, he felt no more pain than the others. The bed is no longer made. The mattress lies bare. Yet this is of no concern to him. Dressed in his pajamas, with a railway rug pulled over him and his dressing gown serving as a pillow, he collapses onto the bed, and warmth quickly radiates from his strong, vigorous frame into the mattress beneath him. It probably takes just a few minutes for the poison to seep in. He is not asleep, but on the verge of slumber when he suddenly becomes aware of physical sensations that are beyond his understanding. He has inhaled death, yet he remains alive. His mind is active, able to send commands to his limbs which still respond. But his time has come. Without any suffering he bolts upright, perhaps feeling an unfamiliar heaviness or a strange odor, but we cannot say for certain. He only experiences a shock, little more. There is no pain, for in that final moment his emotions are forever etched in the muscles of his face. He gasps for air and seeks it desperately. Rushing to the recess, he kneels on the cushion and throws the window wide open. Whether the window was already ajar, we cannot say. Reaching it is his last conscious act, and soon after he is lifeless. The bed raises no suspicion. Why would it? Who could assert that he had even lain down on it? It was even suggested at the inquest that he hadn't. Yet that is precisely what happened. Otherwise, the candle would have burned down to its base. He must have extinguished it and settled in to rest, without question. Now, we must consider the detective, and again, nothing hints that his death is connected to the bed of the Borgia. But you can easily see how he met his end. Peter Flanders desires solitude to study the grey room and all its contents. He is left alone as he wished, moving about, sketching a layout of the room, and exhausting its more conspicuous features. If only he had grasped the significance of the golden bull. Eventually, he sparks a line of thought and sits down to explore it further. Or perhaps he hasn't fully surveyed the room and has taken a seat where he can observe everything around him. He positions himself at the foot of the bed on the right side. He makes his notes, and then his final thoughts come to him, a deep reflection on his profession. For a moment, he forgets the task at hand and writes his ideas in his notebook. He has been sitting on the bed for a time. How long, we do not know, but long enough to raise the temperature that the vigilant fiend within the mattress needs to summon him. Then the spirit of death rises, and Flanders, just as shocked as Captain May had been, jumps to his feet. He takes a couple of steps forward, his book and pen slipping from his hand, and he collapses face down, a lifeless body. Mr. Gainsborough finds him still warm, but the bed he had just leaped from has grown cold, its grim work accomplished. Now we turn to the priest, the Rev. Theodore May. He didn't lie on the bed or sit upon it. Instead, what he did was kneel beside it for a long time, deep in prayer. It's entirely natural that he would stretch his arms over the mattress and bury his face in his hands, staying there in communion with God, voicing one heartfelt prayer after another for the soul he believed was trapped in the grey room, unable to escape. In this position, leaning over the bed with his arms outstretched, and possibly his head resting upon them, he inadvertently generates a heat that attracts the inevitable force of destruction. We don't yet understand how, but he soon loses consciousness and collapses to the floor, while the bed quickly returns to its chilling state. As for the 4 detectives, Inspector Frith and his team were saved by pure luck. At least one of them would have met with death otherwise. If any one of them had chosen to take a seat on the bed, he would surely have died in front of his colleagues. Instead, they chose to sit on chairs in the corners of the room, and those chairs were harmless. Whether their gas masks would have truly protected them remains uncertain, but I have my doubts. Such were the masterworks of the Borgias, for whom the most skilled chemists gladly toiled, likely enriching themselves in the process. Their poisons were crafted to act in such a way that, through their very mechanisms, they concealed all secrets and wiped away any traces. Chemistry has no ties to the supernatural, yet, as we see here, it can produce results that might easily be mistaken for dark sorcery. If we fail to uncover their secrets today, it's easy to imagine that, in their own time, much of what they accomplished was simply attributed to divine intervention. Science will take a great interest in your Borgia mattress, Sir Arthur. I have no doubt that scientists will carefully unravel its secrets and conduct a series of astonishing experiments. Yet I firmly believe that they may be stumped by the clever and lost knowledge of those long since turned to dust. We shall see about that. He stood and instructed Caldwell to summon Stefano. After exchanging a few words, they bid farewell, each shaking the old man's hand and expressing their heartfelt gratitude before departing. "I have a little more to share," Signor Morgan said. "You'll hear what it is tomorrow. For now, good night. It has been a great joy in my long life to provide this service to new and valued friends." The next morning, in the servants' hall, Caldwell shared what he had learned. "And if you ask me," he concluded, "I take back what I thought about him being younger than he claims. He's as old as time itself, older than that horror in the grey room. He's a demon, he's killed the old dog, and I suspect he's a Borgia himself if the truth were known.